Put on your Sunday clothes and head to the London Palladium. I'm just joking, I really don't mind what you wear to the theatre. Within reason. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back, my name is Mickey Jo and I'm obsessed with all things theatre. I'm a professional theatre critic and today I'm going to be letting you know what I thought of the brand new West End revival of the musical Hello Dolly, which officially opened last night at the London Palladium. Now, UK audiences have been waiting a long time to see Hello Dolly again, not just because this particular production was delayed. It was originally planned to open in September of 2020 at the Adelphi Theatre in the West End, where Back to the Future is currently playing, and, you know, both COVID and filming commitments from the cast, including its star Imelda Staunton, meant that it couldn't open until now, summer 2024. But also, prior to this, there hasn't been a major UK production of Hello Dolly since a Regent's Park Open Air Theatre revival back in, I believe, 2009, starring Samantha Spiro. And open air productions are always a slightly different kettle of fish, so there hasn't been an indoor production for even longer. One possible reason for this is that it is quite a quintessentially American show, which is something we're going to explore in today's review. Because though it has opened to a hugely positive response from audience members and critics alike, I find myself struggling with it just a little bit. I still liked it a lot. I'm not sitting here and telling you I didn't think this was a good production. It's incredibly charming, it's joyous, it's like a delicious glass of wine, and believe me, I like a good glass of wine, but I wanted this to be champagne, and it wasn't quite, and I think I can put my finger on a couple of the reasons why, and I'm going to tell you about them in today's review. Now, if you're watching this on my theatre-themed YouTube channel, hello, please feel free to subscribe for more upcoming West End and Broadway reviews, as well as plenty more theatre-themed content. Feel free to turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my many upcoming videos. And if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, hello to you as well. What you can't see is that my feet are in a bowl of ice water right now because it's incredibly warm. In fact, the video people can't see that either, but I thought I would share that with you all today. Much like Cornelius Hepple, I've got elegance. And you know what? This water is already lukewarm and I haven't even started reviewing yet. So I'd better get on with it. Now, if you've seen this production already, if you've seen previous productions of Hello Dolly, as always, feel free to comment down below with all of your thoughts and feelings. In the meantime, here is what I thought when I said hello to Hello Dolly at the London Palladium. So, Hello Dolly was originally a 1964 Broadway musical based on a play called The Matchmaker by Thornton Wilder. It features a very memorable score by Jerry Herman and a book by Michael Stewart, and it follows the story of Dolly Levi, a widowed matchmaker who proudly meddles in other people's lives. An unashamed grafter and something of a grifter, Dolly has a business card for just about any occasion that you could imagine. She provides a handful of different services. She is well known in the New York community among which she once lived, but since the death of her late husband Ephraim Levi, she has become something of a recluse. At the beginning of the show, she is preparing to re-enter public life and rejoin the human race by coordinating an advantageous marriage among the characters who we are going to meet in the show. In fact, Dolly's plan is to disrupt an already planned marriage between the well-known Yonkers half-a-millionaire Horace Vandergelder, who loves nothing in this world more than wealth and the comfort that it can provide, and decries everyone else who marries for love as simply being foolish, and the proprietress of a millinery shop, Irene Malloy. She makes hats. She is also widowed and remarrying for her own convenience because she can no longer tolerate the community thinking that she is a wicked and wayward woman simply because she is unmarried and she works in a hat shop. Listen, it was a different time. Now, Dolly, eyeing this lucrative match for herself, also involves Vandergelder's niece and the man with whom she has an affection, as well as his two employees, Cornelius Hepple and Barnaby Tucker. What ensues is this charming, farcical, very golden age musical theatre plot that is just full of silliness, love, and joy. It's not the weakest narrative in classic musical theatre, it's not necessarily the strongest. Like with many of these shows, it's the strength of the score that keeps the whole thing afloat and entertaining. You have fantastic songs in there, not only the title number Hello Dolly, but also Before the Parade Passes By, It Only Takes a Moment. Jerry Herman knows how to write both a rousing company number like Before the Parade Passes By and Put on Your Sunday Clothes, as well as a beautiful, lush, romantic song like It Only Takes a Moment. And the character of the entire score is charmingly American, so much so that you can hear many of its melodies playing on Main Street USA, at Disneyland, all around the world. Disneyland, Disney World, all of them. Now, for the longest time, this show was associated with one particular star, Carol Channing, and for many who had the chance to see her in the role, Dolly Levi is probably inextricably linked to Carol as a performer, but she's been played by other performers since, notably in the film adaptation starring Barbra Streisand, who was a very different Dolly Levi, not only because she was considerably younger, arguably too young in the role, but also because parts of the score were rewritten for her very different voice. Pearl Bailey joined the show in an iconic all-black recasting that may have been the forerunner to shows like The Wiz, taking a different approach to already beloved musicals, and with many others having come in between, there was a substantial 2017 Broadway revival of the show starring Bette Midler, with Donna Murphy playing the role at certain performances and Bernadette Peters replacing, with Betty Buckley and Carolee Carmello playing that role when that production subsequently toured. In London, meanwhile, there was a revival production with Carol Channing at one point. Previously to that had been a production starring Mary Martin, and for what I believe was the show's last West End run, drag performer Danny LaRue played the role, which goes to show, I think, how differently Hello Dolly is understood on either side of the Atlantic. It means something very different here, and I think I can put my finger on why. But to do that, I'm going to tell you about what I think was ultimately the one shortcoming in an otherwise very lovely production. So to reiterate, I did very much enjoy this production of Hello Dolly. It is lush and lovely. There is one but, and it's a substantial but. And here is my thing. I'm just trying to remember the last time I saw a classic musical comedy where it actually got consistent laughs. And the answer is Guys and Dolls at the Bridge. But I was thinking just a few weeks back to Kiss Me Kate, where the whole thing again looked very charming and stylish and expensive, and it's played and performed very well, and it's very ornate and it's very classic, but it's not particularly funny, and it's a musical comedy. Likewise, this revival of Hello Dolly, it has an abundance of charm. It has plenty of charm. I wouldn't describe it as having been riotously hilarious nor effervescently joyful. And there's another problem, because in the place of that effervescent joy was something else. Now here's my hot take, because I think Americans do joyous musical comedy better than anyone else. I think Broadway does that best. The West End, meanwhile, does sorrow, despair, tragedy. Listen, we've had Shakespeare. And I think many British directors can't resist the urge to temper everything with just a hint of bittersweet sorrow and melancholy, even just the slightest bit. So when this same director, Dominic Cook, directed Follies at the National Theatre a few years ago, also starring Imelda Staunton, she played Sally Durant Plummer, that sense of melancholy and sorrow just seeping into the thing was perfect, was astonishing. And honestly, it's possibly why so many of the great Sondheim revivals of the last 20 years have come out of London, including the most recent Tony Award winner for Best Revival of a Musical. That was originally produced in London by a British director. But if you were to ask me what the best classic musical comedies have been of the last few years, other than Guys and Dolls, which is doing something very different, I would tell you about Crazy for You and The Transfer of Anything Goes, which were both American directed in the UK. So I think there is something to be said for American joy and British despair, which honestly is kind of just our respective moods anyway, but it's ultimately what makes this Hello Dolly feel just a little bit heavier than I would like for it to. I want this whole thing to be joyous. I want to be smiling. I want to be beaming so incredibly wide. Because while it does have depth and moments that sort of begin to approach a slightly sad sincerity, I would never describe it as melancholia, not in Hello Dolly. In shows like this, it's basically a game of keep me up, where we are trying to keep the whole thing as light and buoyant as possible, and if something becomes too sad, it's going to drag everything down. Was that a sports metaphor in the middle of this musical theatre review? Who knew that was coming? I'm as surprised as you are. Let me give you a couple of examples of what I specifically mean by this, because it's mostly where it comes into Imelda Staunton's performance as Dolly, and I think she's one of the most remarkable musical theatre leading ladies that we have. I loved her in Sweeney Todd as Mrs. Lovett. I thoroughly enjoyed her in Gypsy as Madame Rose. And this Dolly is up there with my favourite Imelda Staunton performances, because she's getting to utilise a lot of her incredible talents on stage. She's getting to be naturally funny, but she's also getting to be this pint-sized force who can talk circles around anyone else that she finds herself in conversation with. And there is a moment towards the end of the thing, I'm getting ahead of myself and talking about her performance, where she gets this soliloquy that feels almost Shakespearean, where she is rhapsodizing about her late husband and his outlook. And we finally see Dolly with no pretense. We finally see her completely as she is. but there are moments of reflective grief throughout the thing, and in fact, at the very beginning, it opens to this dark moment where she is hanging away her black mourning dress in a wardrobe that only contains her wedding dress, because evidently the woman does not have many clothes, in anticipation of, like I said, rejoining the human race and returning to society and remarrying. But it's framed with that sadness, and so it just sort of colours everything that comes afterwards. And there are moments where she has asides and she speaks directly to the memory of her late husband out to the audience, and it just tips over slightly into just a little bit too mournful. And listen, everyone has their own opinion of what Dolly Levi ought to be. Maybe you grew up with Barbara, maybe it's only ever going to be Carol Channing, maybe she ought to be hilarious, maybe she ought to be feisty and gutsy, maybe, you know, she ought to be on the brink of tears and there's a real person beneath this mask. For me, I think it works best when she has already navigated a certain amount of this grief. She has been away from New York for a long time, we hear in the script, and she is not about to remarry a second before she is ready to. She asks her husband for a sign that he is okay with this. She asks him for some sort of indication that he approves of the decision that she has made for herself, and she kind of explains the situation to him, and with the idea that he might not be happy about it, but I don't think it needs to feel like she is still completely grief-stricken. After all, the song she sings before the parade passes by, though it may start with a little bit of a tear in her eye, quickly turns to something very upbeat and rousing that ends the first act with an entire parade on stage, for goodness sake. While I'm in my notes section of this review and talking about things I didn't love as much, I thought the staging could have been a little bit fuller. Like I mentioned, this production was originally going to go to the Adelphi. The Palladium is a much bigger and grander stage, and it's a historic building. Anything in that theatre I have high expectations for. I've seen what they do for the pantomime every year. That's the same producer as this production of Hello, Dolly. I know what they can do, and the level of glitz and enormity and scale, they can fill that stage, so there's no reason for this production not to. And if you were to have told me that they were planning to go into the Adelphi last week and they just quickly had to like travel to a different theatre, I would believe you that this set was planning to go into the Adelphi and hasn't been scaled up whatsoever. They have a travelator going across the middle of the floor, which is quite novel, perhaps gets used a little bit too much. We have a lot of walking on the travelator moments, which is a fun effect to begin with, and it gives us this momentum, and we are constantly travelling between New York and Yonkers, Yonkers and New York, New York and Yonkers, and we are going between, and we are walking down the street, and we are promenading, and we are parading. So very smart to have a travelator, and there are great moments with it, with Cornelius and Barnaby and Minnie and Irene strolling down 14th Street, and with Imelda as Dolly flying off into the wings after singing So Long Dearie, leaving Horace alone on stage. But if it were used a few less times, those would have, I think, even more impact. And the problem is that when someone is walking along a travelator and it's moving at the same pace they are, ultimately what we're seeing as an audience is someone standing still. It does become a little static, and there are moments where Imelda is a little too static as well. When she first speaks to Horace and she's literally talking circles around him, she's doing all of that, but she's staying a little more still than I would like her to. I want her to be flying around the space like a whirling dervish. Back to the set, I think I knew in the back of my mind we were never going to get anything as full and grand as the Broadway revival, and this in general I think is something Broadway does a little bit better. A lot of the time when a show transfers from Broadway to the West End, we get what would have been the US tour set, and then when it tours from the West End around the UK, we get an even cheaper version. This production kind of looks like it could be ready to tour, honestly, and perhaps it will. But we spend so much time in places like Irene Malloy's hat shop, there is no reason for that to be just like one piece and a table and a wardrobe off in the middle of nowhere. We can actually have an entire set. I miss entire sets. Can't we have one, please? Then you get to the iconic stairs, and I said to my friend in the interval, if the stairs were particularly good, I would stand and applaud. And I think I don't know if I wanted a carpeted stair, and I don't mind if they're not carpeted. I'm not that specific. However, they were gold, they were curved, and they were a little too high, which meant Imelda, who is a small woman, had to take a lot of care to individually step down each one and had to round a corner, and she's wearing a green dress. My expectation was she would come straight down the middle of this staircase wearing red, as is the way with Hello, Dolly. And I'm not so much of a purist to say it has to always look the same every time, but that is such a moment. It is the defining moment of the show, the best remembered moment of the show. There are some things that you just don't necessarily need to change, especially when you're doing just another classic production. This is not the Jamie Lloyd Sunset Boulevard of Hello Dolly. This is just another beautiful version of the show. And I don't want to stifle the creativity of this creative team by saying, like, the colour of this dress is a foregone conclusion, but she wears red then in the curtain call. Like, I don't care what she wears in the curtain call, she should probably wear red in the Harmonia Gardens. The uniforms of the waiters in that sequence are a little duller than I expected them to be. The whole thing, I just want it to be bright, effervescent, joyful, big. It's the Broadway version of the show I dare to dream that we could produce in the West End. There's no reason British audiences wouldn't enjoy all of that. Plus, I keep hearing about how much cheaper it is to produce these shows at all in London, so why is it that the versions of shows that we get here look cheaper still? Explain that one to me. Back to the way she literally walks down the staircase. The difference between rounding a corner and having to carefully get down one step at a time and just coming straight down the thing is the way that it characterizes her return. And perhaps they were leaning into her reluctance and her anxiousness about coming back to the Harmonia Gardens, and she is then comforted by the way that they receive her. Another interpretation of it would be to have her literally just slowly coming down the staircase, regal, goddess-like, delighting all of the people in the restaurant, immediately charmed and just thrilled to be back there. And I feel like that one is more Dolly. The former is a little bit Sally Durant Plummer, where, you know, she works her confidence up slowly, but she's nervous to go back and see these people she hasn't seen in a long time. If it seems like I'm being incredibly specific and splitting hairs over little choices here, it's because this is a substantial revival of a big show with huge stars, brilliant directors. All of these people know what they're doing. And this isn't to say that I didn't enjoy plenty of it. So let me tell you now all of the lovely things about this production. So while I do think it could have been funnier and that we kept one foot a little too planted in the sorrow of it all, I did enjoy Dominic Cooke's direction a lot, and it centres the production's greatest asset, which is its shimmering star, Imelda Staunton, as Dolly Levi. We'll talk more about performances in the last section of this review, but they understand the power that she has, the brilliance that she has, and they give her all of the space that she needs and all of the necessary reverence to showcase that. And she is still surprising audiences, I think, when she is involved in this, you know, honestly show-stopping production number in the second act, Hello Dolly. And those with longer memories will know that she has already proved herself within the world of musical theatre and musical comedy. She's been in Guys and Dolls, she was in Into the Woods as the baker's wife. She's having this musical renaissance post Sweeney Todd, Gypsy, Follies, now Hello Dolly. But she brings a substantial amount of joy to it, because to see her smile, to see her making these jokes, to see her in the curtain call, like giving a wink wink while singing "Look at the old girl now, fellas," you can't help but love that. It also may have been a little unfair of me to characterize the production as being less than simply because it is, you know, smaller than the 2017 Broadway revival version. This is still a substantial production. We have a train that comes on stage and then goes off the other side of the stage. That's a thrilling moment. I do wish that the choreography at the climax of Put On Your Sunday Clothes could have people dancing rather than everyone being on the train at that point and just simply doing this backwards and forwards, but I enjoy the choreography for the rest of the show. And again, it's Hello Dolly. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. It just needs to look classic and lovely. So I enjoy the start of Put On Your Sunday Clothes very much. I enjoy the choreography in the song Hello Dolly, in the whole section that precedes that, where we have these interludes with all of the waiters dancing around and doing a ballet in between different comic asides from the two dinner parties that we are watching happening at the Harmonia Gardens. It starts too high too soon. All of the dancing is phenomenal. It looks glorious. It just doesn't build, because we have this group of waiters kicking high, leaping around from their first introduction, and then we go to a scene about Cornelius not having enough money, and then the waiters come back out and they kick the same and they leap the same, and then we go to a scene where Horace is frustrated with Ernestine and money, and the waiters come back on, they kick, they leap. Cornelius doesn't have enough money, they kick, they leap. Horace is frustrated, they kick, they leap. This is the problem, is that it just gets too samey, and there's a little too much dead space in that section. I'm meant to be telling you about the stuff that I liked, and I'm somehow still criticising. I need you to know this is only because I have extraordinarily high standards. This is still a very sumptuous production of the show. The costuming, I think, looks gorgeous. What there is of the set design looks lovely. I love the light bulbs all the way over the proscenium. I like that they can walk up and down from the orchestra pit. I like that it's involving the orchestra in this way. We're not trying trying to like immerse the audience completely in this world, we know we're seeing a musical comedy. The back screen is a digital screen showing backgrounds moving across, which is clever. On costuming, I will say there was one perhaps magenta sparkly number that Jenna Russell was wearing in the second act as Irene Malloy that was just a little bit, and you know, there's no kind way to say this necessarily, just a little Miss Piggy, which did get me to thinking about how necessary a Muppet version of Hello Dolly would be. You can put Miss Piggy in any of those roles. Listen, try it, think it for yourself, they all work. Except for Ermengarde, who is obviously Camilla the Chicken. But it looks gorgeous. For the 10th time I will tell you, it is deeply charming, it is witty, it will make you smile even if you're not beside yourself with laughter the entire time. It's just very pleasant and very satisfying. In many ways it's like a fancy meal. It leaves me feeling lovely, but I almost always want just a little bit more from it. Probably the biggest creative triumph is the music side of everything. Nicholas Skilbeck serves as musical director as well as musical supervisor for this revival and has also provided some new arrangements. Now the material deviates in an interesting way because it incorporates an entire song from the film. The opening number utilizes Just Leave Everything to Me rather than I Put My Hand In, and having heard both of them now, I'm not sure there's actually that much of a difference. Just Leave Everything to Me obviously is just a little bit more Streisand, but I wonder if in general some of the team here were quite enamored with the film because they have incorporated slight plot changes, very small ones, from the film version of the show, as well as a couple of the film's lyric changes and a little bit of the film's dialogue as well. And I tend to think that the stage material usually works well for the stage and film material usually works well for film, but I don't know enough of Hello Dolly. I haven't seen enough productions to really be able to comment on the differences between the two little changes in material to say what works better. Another music change, this production, like the 2017 revival before it, also reinstates the Act 2 opening number for Horace van der Gelder, Penny in My Pocket. It delays when we see Dolly, it allows us to anticipate her just a little bit more. Other than that, I'm not really sure what function it serves. We already know that he's obsessed with money, that's all that that number tells us. It doesn't characterize him in a different way. It doesn't begin to show him evolving in the way he ultimately will. By the end of the thing, he is still the same miserly Horace van der Gelder. I do wonder if the pace of the thing musically is meant to kind of showcase a similarity between him and Dolly. She had this Act 1 opening where we see her silhouetted against a window and then she sings a very pacey song. Act 2 opens in a very similar way where we see him silhouetted against a very similar window and then he sings sort of a pacey song. But to discuss that further, I think we should talk about the performances of this sublime cast. So the whole thing starts and ends with Dame Imelda Staunton, the newly titled Dame Imelda Staunton. And while nothing can top her Mrs. Lovett and Sweeney Todd for me, this is probably number 2 up there in terms of the roles that I have seen her in. And, you know, she's so warm and she's so funny and she is constantly playing these very dark and sinister, jagged characters who are either going through something excruciating or they're kind of monsters a little bit themselves, and there's none of that in Dolly Levi. Like, she manipulates her way to get what she wants, but she is so abundantly charming and wonderful. She wins everybody over to her side, and she has nothing but good intentions for the world. And she cares deeply about everyone around her, and she achieves her will through hilarious means. And it's lovely getting to see Dame Imelda play that. She still has this very ever so slight sharpness to her, but it kind of gets wrapped up in just her power and her force as Dolly. She is very much a force to be reckoned with, and it's that that earns this production's biggest laughs. It's every moment where we can see the machinations of what she is doing, and she manages to talk someone into doing something that they know is ridiculous, but she's been so persuasive about it. This happens a lot with Horace, where she talks him around to a completely different way of thinking. It also happens with Irene, where she's ready to, you know, have Cornelius and Barnaby arrested for being in her shop, and Dolly agrees, but manages to convince her to go out to dinner with them first, which ends up being romantic, which has been her plan the entire time. I will also say, when she returned to musical theatre in Sweeney Todd, I could not have predicted the vocal she would be delivering in Hello Dolly. This, I think I'm going to say is my favourite Imelda Staunton vocal I have ever heard on stage. She sounds so robust and just strong in this. It's very Broadway, it's very powerful. Her performance of So Long Dearie in particular is formidable. But then to complete the arc, she does find all of this very tender depth in those moments of reflective grief, and at the beginning of Before the Parade passes by, there are tears in her eyes. It's beautiful. It's a fantastic, fantastic performance. Opposite her, we have Andy Nyman, who I thought was sensational as Tevye in a production of Fiddler on the Roof a little while ago in London. He's not quite as old as they're trying to make him here to play Horace van der Gelder, but he delivers a brilliant stubbornness with it. He's also a very funny man, and I think he could play with the thing just a little bit more. I think if we were able to see more of an early chemistry between Dolly and he, that the whole thing would feel like it was on an inevitable path somewhere, rather than him just rounding this corner unexpectedly at the last minute. He feels sort of almost brutishly opposed to her for much of the thing, and we don't get the sense that, you know, it hasn't occurred to him, he doesn't know any better yet. It does just feel as though he legitimately doesn't want a marriage with her. And maybe you can play it that way, I just think it's a little less charming. I also think something like the delivery of A Penny in My Pocket probably needs just an ounce more showmanship. His characterization is mostly the same as we go through the thing until the very last few moments, which are really beautifully played. We also have Jenna Russell as Irene Malloy. Jenna, another of my absolute favourite stage performers. She brings so much magic on stage always. But, you know, it's interesting seeing her sort of returning to a role like Irene Malloy. She played Sarah Brown in Guys and Dolls almost 2 decades ago now, and it's sort of very akin to that kind of a performance. She has, you know, other than getting to be on the Palladium in this glorious revival of a show that is not done in the UK very often, she has kind of moved past these roles, and she not too long ago played Sally Durant Plummer herself, and she's kind of in that era not too far behind Imelda in terms of those roles that she is playing. And yes, Irene Malloy is a widow, and yes, it works for her to be a little older, a little wiser, a little more worldly than Cornelius Hepple. I just wanted perhaps a little bit more playfulness from her and a slightly lighter touch. It came with a little bit of oomph that honestly made her seem like she could probably play Dolly in a couple of years. Emily Lane as Minnie Fay, however, inspired and showing a tremendous understanding of the exact tone necessary in this kind of a classic musical. The vocal affectation, the characterization, the comic timing, she understands exactly where to place this Minnie Fay, and in fact Harry and Tyrone as Cornelius and Barnaby have that same thing. They understand the tone of what it is that they are delivering. It's a very precise tone in this kind of a golden age musical. She's hysterically funny, gets some of the biggest laughs in the show. There's this moment where she has this delayed reaction to having seen Cornelius hiding in a cupboard. It's so funny, and then Jenna whisks her off stage and we hear the sound of her slapping her. That's a hilarious sequence, as is everything that follows with them trying to escape and an entire production number distracting Horace van der Gelder just to have them returning back to the spots where they were hiding before. Speaking of these two gentlemen, Harry Hepple as Cornelius Hepple, I think he's just wonderful in this. I thoroughly enjoyed him, and I've been enjoying his performances over the years in a handful of things. I saw him in Pippin at the Menier, I saw him in Romantics Anonymous, and a nice meaty role like this. Lovely to see him getting this opportunity, because he plays a beautifully earnest romantic lead. He has this whole wide-eyed juvenile quality down, and he is beautifully supported by the abundance of enthusiasm from Tyrone Huntley as Barnaby Tucker. He is just wonderful, full of energy. His Barnaby doesn't really dance as we've seen in previous productions of the show, so they don't riff on that moment where Barnaby is taught briefly by Dolly how to dance and then suddenly is doing all of this impressive balletic athletic dancing, but he wins me over with every single delivery of Holy Cabooses. Now last but certainly not least, almost my MVP of the whole damn thing, because she comes in understanding the need for some really good musical comedy here. I am talking about Jodie Jacobs, who cameos at the start of the second act as Ernestina Money. And I ask you, when is Jodie Jacobs ever not glorious on stage? Effortlessly funny, just comedy seeping out of their damn pores, bawdy and clueless and lacking in any kind of social convention. It's a brilliant few moments on stage when she gets to play this scene with Horace van der Gelder. Jodie is an absolute riot, and I believe also covers the role of Dolly Levi. Now, Imelda is not planning to miss any performances during this show's run, but neither was Julie Andrews and Victor Victoria. Things happen unexpectedly, and, you know, no one's ever planning to miss a bunch of shows, unless they are. But what I'm saying is, if Jodie Jacobs does get the chance to go on and play Dolly Levi, you best bet I will be running to the London Palladium and you should as well. In the meantime, those have been my thoughts about this revival of Hello Dolly. I want to circle back to say it is beautiful, it is stunning, it is charming, it does an awful lot of things very well. It has a slight quality to it that I think diminishes what it could be. Do I think that's going to interfere with the enjoyment of the vast majority of ticket holders this summer? No, I don't. Those who are going to see Imelda Staunton giving a rapturous performance in a charming classic show are going to get everything they expected, and I hope you all have a lovely time, and I hope everyone enjoyed it, I really do, because though I sound like a mean old theatre critic, I enjoyed it very much myself. So let me know what you did think of Hello Dolly in the comment section down below. If you've seen Hello Dolly previously, let me know when you've seen it what you thought of those productions as well. In the meantime, I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!